Okay, so welcome everyone. We'll just start turning towards our little opening so we can get the streams flowing. So thank you so much. Welcome to the Rudolf Steiner branch of Chicago's 12 Holy Nights lecture series. This is our second night, or day, or morning, depending which part of town you are. And it's an honor to have Lelan Harris of Wise Cosmos presenting. And yeah, I was just realizing I had the pleasure of meeting Leland just about this time 2 years ago, before lockdowns and coronavirus and everything. We had the pleasure of meeting in at the Biodynamics gathering in Northern California, listening to Dennis Klochek, and he was just sharing how he had this Wise Cosmos thing going on with Brian Gray and others, and just getting ready to launch. And as we were catching up, it came at a powerful time, just as this culture of sharing content is really streamlined. So here we are walking in this new context in these holy nights, and I'll just pass it to you, Leland. Thank you so much, and blessings everyone on the time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Frank. And hello to everyone who's with us. I'm just excited to see many people that I know and others that I don't know yet. We might have been passing in the ethers over these last couple of years, but I haven't gotten to know you. But today might be an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little better. My plan for these next couple of hours is going to be to do some introductory material, including giving you a chance to hear other voices besides myself. And then I will go into more, and that's like the setup and introduction. Then I'm going to go into more of a teaching time where we really get to the point. But during that time, it's going to be really interactive. It's not just going to be me talking and then stop and give you a chance to talk. I'm going to be inviting you to interact almost point by point as we go through this, because I really want to invite us to really drill down on a couple of main points and really explore it and try to find the connections. And the wisdom of the group, the knowledge of the group, is going to really assist us to move forward. And rather than sort of me just coming and somehow thinking I'm the teacher, it's really that we're going to be able to assist each other. And so I'm really excited about this. So I'm going to start by going into a screen share with PowerPoint. Get that ready to go here. And here we go. Okay, so one of the things that is still circulating in a lot of the groups that I'm a part of, and in the conversations that I'm a part of, there continues to be, from many different vantage points, the question about where are we now in human history and what's coming next? Where are we going? Now, there seems to be, in the groups that I'm a part of, there seems to be much less fear in the conversations than there used to be, and yet it's still, uncertainties and fear still do pop up here and now and again. And so underlying this, often not phrased as a specific question, because it's just sort of, we're just sharing this is what we're feeling and this sort of these uncertainties. One of the underlying questions is really wanting to know what's coming. We want to predict the future. We want to know what's coming. Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be some sort of mix? And I came across this quote while I was in the midst of preparing for this presentation, thinking about it more. I wasn't preparing, I was just thinking about it. I felt guided to bring this topic, but like, now what am I going to do now that I have the topic? And I came across this quote. And this quote, the best way to predict the future is to create it. is attributed to many different people. And based on the research I did online, the fundamental agreement is nobody knows who said it. And there's variations on it. So it's one of those things that people down through at least the last couple of 100 years, going back to Abraham Lincoln's day and thereabouts, at least going back that far, there are various versions of this that people have used to great effect. And I thought it's a sort of different take on what I was thinking when I first received the idea to bring this content today. And so I put it on here to let you know that it's one of those things that as we go through the next nearly couple hours together, maybe keep this in the back of your mind. We, you, me, us, all of humanity, we have the power to create the future. And Rudolf Steiner says this in so many different ways, and I'm going to be focusing on one of the particular ways in which Rudolf Steiner brings this message. The best way to predict the future is to create it, though to my knowledge, he never actually said it. Here's the actual, what I received to bring today. And the title comes directly from a lecture that we will be diving into by Rudolf Steiner, combining the most genuine inward esotericism with the greatest conceivable public openness and deeds. So one of the questions for you is, this would be like the pretest. What does Rudolf Steiner mean, or what do you think the words simply mean by genuine inward esotericism? What is genuine inward esotericism? And what could Rudolf Steiner possibly be referring to when he uses the phrase repeatedly, greatest conceivable public openness and deeds? Well, this description comes also almost very nearly verbatim from Rudolf Steiner, just paraphrased slightly to be a description. Rudolf Steiner's vision was that everything we externally do and publicly say should manifest the truth and reality of our inward esotericism. He said that as anthroposophists, spiritual scientists, and/or esoteric Christians, we will only be taken seriously in all the varied realms of public life if we follow, moment by moment, the impulses and guidance that come from the spiritual world. He emphasized that we must develop the perceptive capacity and moral strength to both know and implement what the spiritual world wants to achieve in and through us for the redemption, healing, and transformation of humanity, earth, and cosmos. The best way to predict the future is to create it in partnership with the spiritual world. Now, yesterday, through Chicago branch, Ross Rentea offered the First in the Holy Nights series. And right down at the very end of his presentation, there was one last question that sort of slid in at the last moment. And Ross responded to that for about 9 or 10 minutes. And then as he finished, it was opened up, Andre opened it up to me to say, hey, Leland's here. Do you want to say anything about what you're going to say tomorrow? And I said, Ross just perfectly set it up. What Ross has just done in the last 2 hours, and especially in this last, answering that last question, he has perfectly set me up for where I'm going to go. And what I'm going to do next, for those of you who weren't there to participate, Or even if you were, I want you to hear it again. And I'm going to show you a clip of that last 9 or 10 minutes. And it is available, as this screenshot shows, that the recording is available at Callisto, so you can go listen to the whole thing, which I certainly recommend. All right, and so now here's part of the reason I'm sharing it. Not only did Ross sort of set me up, so it's going to give us sort of a running start. He sets this up, what we're going to talk about today, by modeling it. So what I'm going to do, instead of giving you the concepts and then examples, I'm going to give you Ross, who's going to model what Rudolf Steiner says we need to do. So I'm going to invite you, as you listen, don't just listen to the wonderful things that Ross says. Listen to how he's saying it, listen to what he's pointing to, and if I may be so bold, see if you can figure out where he's getting this stuff from. Because where Ross is getting this stuff from is where Rudolf Steiner says you and me must also get it from there, okay? And this is achievable, attainable, and everyone who's here, everybody who's watching this in live or on replay, you have the ability to do this, or you have the capacity. All we need to do is keep developing that capacity, these capacities, plural, into active abilities. All right, so here comes Ross. See. Sorry, I just want to close this. There we go. All right, here we go.
Yeah. Cool. So the one question that was sent to me was, is the human family at a point where each one needs to individually find a way out of the present world situation? Or is it a matter of a percentage of the collective to find the way?
Look, funny that person, that friend would ask that question, because I was just preparing, before I started this presentation, I was preparing a little email to send out. So this is the question to the answer, like Jeopardy, you know. So what is happening right now is that one of the anthroposophical doctors made the point that with other pandemics, it could be definitely seen that they resulted from a destruction or a degradation or whatever, of the ecology, earth processes. And this destruction then led to the appearance of the illness-causing organisms that were not there before. Now, you can say that that is due to this or that factor. We don't know exactly what this pandemic is caused by. So, if you think about it, not if you think about it, you've heard all sorts of theories. Some people say, well, it's a virus. Other people say there's no virus. It's all 5G. Other people say it's something else, okay? Everybody, however, agrees that something is actually happening in the world that is very destructive, very disturbing, okay? Now, there are people, there are, prominent people who say the vaccines are horrible. Others say there's no problem with the vaccines. The issue, however, is that if you look at what Rudolf Steiner says, for example, on the climate change, I've talked about that. He says climate change to the earth is like a fever to the human being. When the human being is ill, he'll get a fever because he's trying to remedy something. At the earth sphere, morality, ethics have gone so far down that the earth is rebelling by creating a fever. If you keep that in mind, the thing that is a problem is that whether you say the vaccines are bad or whether you say the vaccines are good, you have not changed anything in the soul spiritual behavior of people. If you say vaccines are bad, well, what's left? What's left is more medications. Oh, is that suddenly so good? Is that just holy because, it's something that's hidden? If you say vaccines are good, you haven't changed anything in the soul spiritual. So whether they're good or bad, it doesn't matter. You cannot remedy something out of the same principles that made the world sick to begin with. What is needed is new answers. That's what this whole lecture was all about. That you need new answers, and the new answers are only going to come from anthroposophy. The new answers are going to come only from eurythmy and from substances that are done new and from new meditations, from new, cultuses, meaning Christian community, religious services, the new that anthroposophy brings. And that's why, to the great displeasure of some of our anthroposophical friends, we at Colisco have tried not to take a position for the good or the bad of what is already out there in culture, but just to bring whatever understandings we can out of anthroposophy. So how can you do that? How can you bring that into the world? Well, first of all, obviously, as an individual, you need to change and you need to change your behavior. But the one thing that is really critical is that I am so glad that that friend asked that question. It really gave me the opportunity to really make an important point. And the important point is that Rudolf Steiner one time, never mind what other gods he means, but he says the other gods have come for individual people, but the Christ being has come for a community. The Christ being has come to unite mankind. The more you have a community, the more the Christ can come in. Remember, I said way in the beginning that in the Christian community, it says Christ in you, and then it's suddenly one of the servers says, and may he fill your spirit. He's addressing the priest, but the priest is there to represent the community. So basically, the way it's called is Christ in you as an individual and Christ in the community as a whole, because that's how the Christ being wants to work. Of course, you cannot be not doing your share, because then you're not going to be part of the community. So the same thing with Michael. Michael needs to be approached in freedom by the individual person, but there is also a community that has been created by common working together. The circle friends went to Rudolf Steiner and said to him, "Can we help in any way?" And Rudolf Steiner says, "Help, I have enough from the spiritual world. You need to do your meditation deeper and better." So that's an important one for us to all understand. So I would like to finish, if I may. The time is quite advanced, because there's one more thing that I would like to share with you. that Rudolf Steiner at one point makes the comment that democracy, now everybody's ears really should be picking up. Oh my God, he's going to talk about democracy. Yes, Rudolf Steiner says that democracy has in it the ferment for decay and for stopping to work. I hope that everybody sort of takes a gulp at what I just said. Democracy has the ferment in itself to die, unless it has three things. One, understanding the existence of the spiritual world. Two, valuing the human being. And three, observing the work of the spirit in nature. Let's rephrase that. And then let's make sure that we don't go so deep that the 12 holy nights are going to be gone. So the point is, democracy needs the power of the Trinity. It needs to know, we need to know that there is a spiritual world from which we came. We need to work in such a way that we are valuing the human being because the Christ is in the human being. And we need to look around us into the future, what we do with nature, because that's where the Spirit, God, is going to go next. So with that, I just wanted to show you that all this discussion that we've had, if we really do deeply our anthroposophical work, then we will have done the best that we can to save democracy. And once we've said that, then we know that we've not wasted our time, and we're not part of a sect, and we're not just sort of ignoring the problems of the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ross, for bringing that and really being a role model for us. Again, not just what you said, but how you said it, and the how you model getting to these kinds of understandings. What I want to do next is share with you Rudolf Steiner's words that guide us in the direction of how to become the kind of people that Ross has just been talking about, what Ross has been inviting and challenging us to become. What I'm going to do is I have another video clip, and we're going to have the opportunity to listen as well as watch and read along the text if you're interested. And if you prefer one or the other, you can ignore, turn off the sound and just read along, or you can just not read along and just listen, whatever is best for you. Now here's the setup for where this is coming from. Yesterday morning, 98 years ago, on December 26, 1923, Rudolf Steiner stood up at the Goetheanum in Dornach, Switzerland. He faced an audience representing the worldwide leadership of the Anthroposophical Society. Now, why had these leaders and other representatives gathered together from around the world at Christmas? Well, from December 23rd, 1923 through January 1st, 1924, the Goetheanum hosted the Christmas conference for the foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society. We sometimes refer to it simply as the Christmas conference or the foundation meeting. For each of those 10 days, the schedule was filled with formal meetings, surprising lectures, and the occasional startling revelation, along with various other activities. Yesterday, 98 years ago, was day 4 of the Christmas conference. The people who were there represented the worldwide leadership, of what might reasonably be called the first incarnation of the Anthroposophical Society. They had traveled to Dornach to participate in crafting the Anthroposophical Society's second incarnation. It was 10 o'clock in the morning when Rudolf Steiner stood up and faced the audience. The words he spoke 98 years ago are also spoken directly to those of us gathered here today by Zoom, and to all those who will watch and listen to the replay, and to all those who will ever read that lecture or listen to it being read. I really do mean it when I say that Rudolf Steiner is speaking to us today, because he specifically says that he is also addressing, quote, anthroposophical gatherings in the future. And what are we here? An international group of people who have aligned with anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner, or perhaps are exploring whether or not to hang out with these anthroposophists and spiritual scientists and esoteric Christians. Nevertheless, we are that future gathering that Rudolf Steiner was speaking about. The anthroposophic gatherings in the future refers to people who in one form or another are aligning themselves with anthroposophy and who gather together from all over the world to engage each other on esoteric themes, topics, and activities. And again, friends, just to emphasize it, that's you and me today, right now. And so it is that while Rudolf Steiner spoke the following words within the context of those physically present in Dornach 98 years ago, the heart of his message was not those people. The heart of his message was aimed to all anthroposophic gatherings in the future. All right, here we go. Excuse me, I have to cue the next one up. And here that should do it.
This is part 7 of the Christmas conference for the foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924. This is the continuation of the foundation meeting. It is the next day, the 26th of December, 10 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Steiner. My dear friends, we are in the middle of the reports by the General Secretaries and the representatives of the groups working in all kinds of places outside Dornach. In a moment we shall continue with these reports. But first I would like to speak a few words in the midst of these reports, words to which I am moved by what has been said in such a satisfactory way by these speakers. From what we have been told, we may gather how very devoted is the work being carried on out there. We may add what we were told yesterday to the names I allowed myself to mention the day before. There, too, despite the ruins on which we stand, we may see what can encourage us during this conference, not to be pessimistic in any way, but rather to strive actively for a genuine optimism. During this conference, we must everywhere, in every realm, consider the activity of building up rather than the activity of dismantling. So today, early on in the conference, I want to suggest that we give it a certain definite direction. During the meetings of members over the next few days, there will, of course, be opportunities for discussing various matters. But today, early on, I want to say the following. As we saw in the necessary content of the statutes, we have to connect total openness with the Anthroposophical Society. Anything less, dear friends, is not permitted by the signs of the times. The present age can no longer tolerate any tendency toward secrecy. This presents us with a fundamental problem, which we shall have to solve. By this, I do not mean that we shall have to discuss it a great deal during the conference, for it is in our hearts that this fundamental problem will have to be solved. We must be absolutely clear about the fact that our society, before all others, will be given the task of combining the greatest conceivable openness with true and genuine esotericism. At first, under the obstacles and hindrances of those terrible years of the war, but then also through all kinds of inner difficulties, we have indeed experienced the establishment of this problem in every direction. Indeed, lately, no meeting within the Anthroposophical Society has taken place which lacked, as it were, the backdrop, though unnoticed by many, of this problem. How can we combine full openness with the profoundest, most serious, and inward esotericism? To achieve this, it will be necessary to banish from our gatherings in the future anything which smacks in any way of the atmosphere of a clique. Anthroposophy does not need the atmosphere of a clique. When hearts truly understand anthroposophy, they will beat in unison without the need for heads to knock together. If we solve this purely human problem of letting our hearts sound in harmony with one another, without the need for our heads to knock together, then from the human side we shall have done everything necessary, also in the leadership of the Anthroposophical Society, to prepare for the achievement of the things that have been depicted. We must achieve these things. We must reach the point at which we can feel in all our deeds that we are connected with the spiritual world. This is the very aspect which must be different in the Anthroposophical Society from any other possible association in the present time. The difference must be that out of the strength of anthroposophy itself, it is possible to combine the greatest conceivable openness with the most genuine and inward esotericism. And in future, this esotericism must not be lacking even in the most external of our deeds. There is in this field still a lot to learn from the past 10 years. What I am saying is also related to our responsibilities. Consider the following, my dear friends. We stand in the world as a small society, and this society has a peculiar destiny at present. Even if it wanted to, it could not reject this characteristic of openness, which I have been emphasizing so strongly. It would be unable to reject it. For if, out of some leaning of sympathy, we were to decide today to work only inwardly with our groups, which would of course be very nice, if we were not to concern ourselves with the public at large, we would discover that there would soon be an increasingly inimical concern for us on the part of the public. The more we fail to concern ourselves with the signs of the times, the more will be the inimical concern for us on the part of everything that can possibly be against us. Only if we find the path, only if with courage we find the straight path to what we should do, shall we succeed in navigating the ship of the Anthroposophical Society through the exceedingly stormy waves which surge and break around it. What we should do is the following. As a small society, we face the world, a world, you know, the one I mean, which actually does not love us. It does not love us. This is a fact we cannot alter. But on the other hand, there is no need to do anything on purpose to make ourselves unpopular. I do not mean this in a superficial sense, but in a deeper sense, of which I speak from the foundations of occult life. If we ask ourselves over and over again what we must do to make ourselves better liked by this circle or by that circle in the world, by any circle which does not like us today, if we keep asking ourselves how we should behave in this field or in that field so as to be taken seriously here or there, if we do this, we shall most certainly not be taken seriously. We shall only be taken seriously if at every moment, in whatever we do, we feel responsible toward the spiritual world. We must know that the spiritual world wants to achieve a certain thing with mankind at this particular moment in historical evolution. It wants to achieve this in the most varied realms of life. And it is up to us clearly and truly to follow the impulses that come from the spiritual world. Though this might give offense initially, in the long run it is the only beneficial way. Therefore we shall also only come to terms among ourselves if at every moment we steep ourselves in whatever impulses can come out of the spiritual world. So, now, having given these indications, which I shall bring to completion over the next few days, I once more want to repeat before you, at least, a part of those words which were spoken to you yesterday, in accordance with the will of the spiritual world. May they stand as an introduction in our souls again today, as we enter into our discussions. Soul of man, thou livest in the limbs which bear thee through the world of space, in the spirit's ocean being. Practice spirit recalling in depths of soul, where in the wielding will of world creating, thine own eye comes to being within God's eye, and thou wilt truly live in the world being of man. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythm of time into the realm of thine own soul's feeling. Practice spirit awareness in balance of the soul, where the surging deeds of the world's becoming thine own eye unite with the world eye, and thou wilt truly feel in the soul weaving of man. Soul of man, thou livest in the resting head, which from the grounds of eternity opens to thee the world thoughts. Practice spirit beholding in stillness of thought, where the eternal aims of God's world being's light on thine own eye bestow for thy free willing, and thou wilt truly think in the spirit foundations of man. We can work rightly with words such as these, which are heard coming from the cosmic word, if we arrange them in our own soul, in such a way that they cannot depart from us again. And it will be possible for them to be so arranged if amongst all that has resounded, you first highlight that part which can give you the rhythm.
Well, that reading from the foundation stone meditation really got me this time. I would like to open it up now to have a first opportunity for any of you who wish to share any thoughts or comments, questions, epiphanies, revelations. And then we're going to dive right back into Rudolf Steiner's words and see what we can do to come to a greater understanding of what Rudolf Steiner is inviting us to, pointing us to, and how we ourselves can make progress to become the kind of people who truly change the world. I believe if you raise your hand, I see Leon already has done that. If you look towards the bottom right of your screen, there is a reactions button. You click on that and you can do things such as raise your hand. And I already see Leon and John Stephen. So Leon, please, I'm gonna go ahead. Let me see if I can unmute you. Yep, Leon, I think you're good to go.
Dear Lelan, good to see you, and thanks for our correspondence over the past few days. It's been very enlightening. And thanks for showing the final part of yesterday, because I was not at home and my battery expired and I missed it. So really appreciate that. And I'm touched by what you're doing with the foundation stone. I won't go into this anymore right now. Let some others speak.
Well, thank you for the affirmations, Leon. Thank you. And John Stephen, please proceed.
Yes, Leland, thank you. You, in bringing Ross back, you reiterated a question I had yesterday with him. I don't have his words exactly, but he said something like that we need to understand the spirit in nature because that is where the spirit is going to go next. And he used the word next. And so my query is, spirit has always been in nature. How is it that different now that spirit is going to nature next? I'm not sure what Ross meant, and that's my question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Ross is here. If I scroll down real quick. Ross, you're here. Are you, if you're, are you available to take that question, or I can give a response?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, I obviously want to hear your response, but but briefly, and again, one appreciates questions sometimes more than answers. Anyway, the idea is that you're coming. I will say it sort of like one sentence or two, and that's it. Yeah, one comes out of the spiritual world, ex deo nascimur. One lives on earth with the changing creative word of the Christ being, and one goes over, if one does that correctly, into the etheric world where the Christ is present. And this new etheric world constitutes the nature of the future. We need to remember that the spiritual world changes, it matures, the gods change. So this is something that's completely new. And this is what I think partially what Rudolf Steiner is referring to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ross. And the question really was, what did Ross mean? And so you've said it. If you had not been here, I would have offered this to make it even just slightly more simple and more direct. But it's what Ross said, but it's this. I would emphasize this element, and that is that the spiritual world is a gift to us, certainly to get us to this point. but this, I'm sorry, nature, the spiritual world, yes, he was talking about that. So bring spiritual world down to nature. So the spiritual world that is in nature, that is nature, is gift to us, says Rudolf Steiner, for us to make all sorts of mistakes. But at a certain point, it is for, which is right now in human history, is for us to now move into not just use nature, but to enter into relationship and partnership with nature. And so that's, for me, an example of this next step. The Apostle Paul in the book of Romans speaks about creation being in travail, waiting for the children of God to be revealed. And whatever else that may be referring to within that passage, I believe part of it is this transition that Rudolf Steiner points to, that Ross just was referring to also, I believe, about waiting for us to move into relationship and partnership. And that is part of how nature and the spiritual beings and the hierarchies are going to, as we step up and become truly, move progressively towards becoming truly human, not only will we continue to receive even more from them, but we're going to be giving back to them. Rudolf Steiner has a number of different ways of articulating this and different verses, including, for example, the verse, "The stars once spoke to man," to human beings, but they are silent now. But in that, which is difficult, grievous for us, but in that silence, something within humanity, as we continue to develop, begins to become capable of speaking back to the stars, to the spiritual beings of the cosmos. They're waiting for us. They're rooting for us. And so that is what I would emphasize. And I believe it ties in exactly with what we just heard from that lecture of Rudolf Steiner, and we're going to come back to that. It's about not just with nature, but nature is what's closest to us. Nature is ready and receptive and ready to engage us. And in that way, they're closest to us. But then behind that are these other hierarchies as well.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that great question. Yaya.
Thank you for allowing me to share with you a reflection that has come to me. Well, first of all, I would attach myself with what you just said when you're saying that we need to give back to the spiritual world. I have an objection about the use of the word back, because they have given us the free will. Hence, we do not give back as something due, but we give it out of our own choice and freedom. Close parenthesis. The other point that I wanted to make, which I think is rather important, part of the lecture that was read to us very beautifully today mentions the fact that we should not attempt to please all sorts of cliques that could be antagonistic towards us. That is not the point. The point is not to look intelligent or clever or beautiful or inspired. The point is to bring the message from the spiritual world to humanity, which might go against the instinctive attitude of wanting to please everyone. Because in the long term, Steiner words are, it is not beneficial, neither for humanity nor the spiritual world. And I feel that this is actually a threat, a danger that we live constantly with, the fear of not being accepted, the uncomfortable position of being rejected, makes us fall into the trap of wanting to be nice to everyone, even when that is not beneficial either to humanity or the spiritual world. That's all I wanted to share with you.
Exactly, right on. So well said, yeah. And I'm glad even that you mentioned instinct as part of that, and making a distinction with regard to my give back, that there's two different types of give back. At least Rudolf Steiner talks about one that is a sort of the duty. He talks about duty in more than one way. So I'm just talking about one way in which he talks about this, between duty and service, and that service and duty, when he sets this, are not the same thing, but they're different. And so duty, one of the ways he talks about it, duty that arises out of the lower aspects of will: instinct, impulse, or drive, and desire, which is what you were referring to. You were mostly talking about desire, and then you mentioned instinct. So those three lower levels, and which often then comes out as kind of a duty or desire or something like that, as you were pointing out. But what Rudolf Steiner is calling us to is to move up to the level of ego, out of the level of will, free will, out at the level of motive, which is the cutting edge of humanity. That most people, this is difficult to learn how to not just function out of the lower three. And so then out of motive, we serve. And it becomes that kind of having received and in gratitude, and having worked and having made it our own, now freely, out of that pure, the most pure motive that we're able to achieve, to then offer it. And then another image you almost said, that you kind of described, referring to what Rudolf Steiner's just said in that lecture, is how we can be a channel, a conduit, a culvert through which the spiritual world communicates to others. So there's at least these two types of: we receive, we work with it, make it our own, all the work that Rudolf Steiner guides us to do, and then freely offer. And then also in that process, as our relationships with the spiritual world improve, and our capacities then to be that channel, to be that partner through whom the spiritual world works in the lives of others. So beautiful.
You've completed beautifully what I was awkwardly attempting to convey.
Oh, it wasn't awkward. It was beautiful. I just said it in some other words. So beautiful. Thank you for that. And let's see. I don't see another hand specifically raised. There's Florian ready to go, though. Go ahead, Florian. Let's see. Looks like we might have to unmute yourself. Actually, let's see if. There you go. I think.
So I wanted to just begin by adding to this question of the new relationship to nature, the spirit in nature. That, I believe, has something significant to do with the loosening of the etheric that Steiner spoke of in many respects. To begin with, in the region of the head back in the Greek times already. And that I believe it was the 18th century where the heart begins to be transformed and take on more of an etheric quality. And this has set the stage for the emergence of a natural clairvoyance in our time that can be expressed as a kind of heart thinking that's needed to behold nature in the Goethean way, where we lift the veil and see deeper into the spiritual realities behind it. I wanted to thank Ross Rentea for his contributions yesterday, since he's here, and of course Lelan as well. This idea of bringing anthroposophy in a way that is open and shedding this spiritual elitism that occultism can take on, which can lead to a sort of self-righteous Luciferic spirituality rather than a grounded one, which is sort of needed in our time. But I wanted to also bring out this individual practice spirit recollection has to give rise to a new form of self-knowledge that is completely honest, and it doesn't just for the sake of being positive and optimistic to leave out the shadows and the dark forces that are also there. And I think I brought up yesterday the burning of the Goetheanum, which was a tremendous tragedy, yet it set the stage for the Christmas conference, the following Holy Nights. And even the Christmas conference, in retrospect, with the subsequent fractures within the society, which lasted for decades, and the Second World War and what it brought to Germany, where the dominant group of anthroposophists were working. And much of their work was undermined and reversed in certain respects that I think we as a society, as members and maybe friends, need to look at these forces of hindrance, which Rudolf Steiner sought in the first Goetheanum to place before us all at the very focus at the back of the stage, with this sculptural group, which was the only major thing that was saved from that destruction. And the fact that that sculptural group has been put into a side room, I think, is symptomatic of the society, because the mystery of evil is a very integral part of the Michaelic mission in our time, that we now face the incarnation of Ahriman, etc. Anyways, I don't want to go into details with this. I'm sure you all have some understanding of these things, but I just wanted to indicate that we have tremendous challenges. Instead of opening the universe to the world of the stars in the anthroposophical sense, Bezos and Lelan Musk want to get us out there with spaceships and rockets. And then there's the metaverse that Zuckerberg and Facebook are opening up. These are all major obstacles for humanity.
Right. So thank you, Florian, for that. So the emphasis, though, here is absolutely we must hold on to what you're talking about, that we have to pay attention to our dark side, that we have to be self-honest, that all this stuff is can raise concerns for us around the world, but that is not Rudolf Steiner's point here. That's not his point. Ross modeled it for us in the clip that we shared, that we don't get hung up on that stuff. Rather, we go back to the spiritual world. This is what Rudolf Steiner has just been saying to us 98 years ago yesterday, Holy Nights, refounding the Anthroposophical Society, and saying what we must pay attention to is our inward, personal, individual, and communal inward development of the deepest possible esotericism, and simultaneously the greatest conceivable public openness and deeds. And that is the way forward. Now, but still, you're right. So for example, when we're talking about nature and connecting to nature, and that being one of our primary paths to development at the stage that we're at, to become beings of freedom and love. My last presentation at Chicago branch was how Ahriman thwarts our perception of Christ. And one of the main ways that occurs is because of the Ahrimanic nature of nature. That behind nature is the Ahrimanic beings. Now, those beings, you can see that presentation and read Rudolf Steiner's lectures on this with regard to this. But this is where you brought up Lucifer and Ahriman and evil and all this kind of stuff. But we must remember that Lucifer and Ahriman are our friends. They work in partnership with Christ in the middle to bring gifts to us. And that without Lucifer, there are things we would not be able to learn and be capable of doing right now. And same with Ahriman. Now, and as long as they're in association with Christ and offering these gifts, then we are aided. But then what happens is Christ never takes it too far. What Rudolf Steiner calls sin. One of the ways he talks about sin, hamartia, the Greek word, missing the mark, something that's a good thing out of time, wrong place, wrong time, wrong application. But then what Lucifer and Ahriman do is then they move from gift to temptation, and we start, instead of being focused on the relationship with Christ in the middle, then they tempt us to start going away and to pay attention to the gifts that they bring. And then temptation leads to evil, sin, and ultimately death. So yes, all these things are interwoven, but the main point here is that what Rudolf Steiner keeps bringing us back to is what we can do about it. And that if we will all do our work individually and collectively, we will be partnering with Christ for the full redemption of Lucifer and Ahriman and the freedom of humanity, the redemption of humanity. And then I did have one other thought about that, and it slipped my mind, so I will let it go. And Valdemar has his hand up next. Go ahead, Valdemar.
Yes, thank you very, very much for the nice lecture and observations. I would like to mention 3 points. First of all, I don't know if you're acquainted with the fact that we have a very strong anthroposophical medicine movement here in Brazil. There are about 300 anthroposophical doctors in the country. And one group is in a very traditional faculty of medicine. And they refuse to use, and they are trying to introduce anthroposophical medicine there. And they refuse to use Steiner's words, you know. For instance, they don't use etheric body, they use vital body. They don't use astral body, they use body of sensations and emotions and so on. You see, so this is trying to adapt to the external world, but reducing what anthroposophy really is. The second point I would like to say is that we have seen the word openness. You know, we have to be open to the external world. This is one side, right? The other side, the opposite side, is not just being open, but going to the external world. And this means interest to the external world, external in terms of our anthroposophical movement. So there are these two poles, being open and going to the external world, not just, as you said, remaining in ourselves, right? And this interest means getting acquainted with all cultural manifestations, even the evil ones, the ones that we recognize as evil. We have to understand them. We have to know them, right? For instance, materialistic science, right? And the third point is that we, in order to be open and to have an interest to the external world, we have to speak its language. We have to know the language that is being spoken, not just in words, but also in actions and so on, right? These were my thoughts about your nice lecture. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Valdemar. Of all that you said, I was most interested in responding to your first point, but you actually in your last point responded to your first point. And that is, and you used exactly the same word I was going to use. It's the word I use, have been using for decades, is that we must become translators. of Rudolf Steiner's work into the language of others. Rudolf Steiner, so you're talking about the physical body, etheric body, astral body, and we would make the distinction that the physical body is not the material body. And, we have all of this stuff, but Rudolf Steiner himself did not use just, physical, etheric, astral over and over. He used all sorts of different ways of referring to those. And so for me personally, if I am in context, if I am in relationship, if I'm in communication with somebody, could be a stranger, could be my family physician that I see once a year, whoever it is that I'm in relationship with, I try, as you said, to do the best I can to figure out their language, their worldview, what's meaningful to them, the concepts that get their juices flowing. And then I try to bring things like anthroposophical concepts, spiritual science, esoteric Christianity. I try to translate it into language that they will understand and that will take them a step forward. I learned the hard way, as probably most of you have, that if you just bring Steiner sort of untranslated to people, they don't get it. There's this block, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, because they even have, I think Steiner was not afraid of using word demons in our souls. And so Steiner said, we've got demons in our souls, and there's something you can do about that, but they're in there to protect that soul from letting this stuff get in. So we have to figure out a way how to get in there. Christ is in there, and we go in and we connect. So, and for me personally, I am completely comfortable with somebody who is trying to be a bridge between anthroposophy and popular culture or the culture that they find themselves in, and use other words that are at least in the right direction, that give people the opportunity to maybe hook them and say, well, what do you mean by that? And then now you've got a conversation, which leads to the fundamental point is that I agree with what you talked about openness, and that certainly I think that the main aspect of openness in this particular lecture 98 years and a day ago was about letting people in and revealing ourselves, both ways. How you let people in, you reduce as much as possible the restrictions to let people into anthroposophical exploring anthroposophical relationships and concepts, as well as actively going out and doing that. And Steiner was, as every spiritual guru, true spiritual guru has said, that questions are a key part of it. And so one of the things, though, that we often are poor at, in my observation, and at least I have been, and I strive very consciously to improve on this myself, is this idea of how can I be open enough, open in such a way that when I open up and share my inward esotericism, people actually are interested. When I was brand new to anthroposophy, I had a particular conversation, very memorable conversation, very early on with a Christian community priest. And as I said, I was new to anthroposophy, and so I was a convert. I was like, we must tell everybody about this. Why did it take me 2/3 of my life before at this point now 2/3, at that point it took my whole life before I could find out about this. What's up with that? Well, there's reasons for that. But the point is, I was ready to just go shout it from the rooftops. And I said to this Christian community priest, why aren't you out there? Why do you spend all your time in the church and in just your little Christian community? Why aren't you out there finding ways? And, bless his heart, he was actually a little offended by my enthusiasm because he was experiencing it as pointed, but it's because he felt it. Offense is partly it, but also something was piercing. And he said something to me, and he said, we've tried. We've done everything that we could think of. We've gone to the local colleges to be part of panel discussions. We've done this, that, and the other thing. And none of it has worked. And my response to him then, 17 years ago, and is still the response I basically have today. And that is, just because what you've tried hasn't worked doesn't mean stop. And then I share a little thing that my dad said to me when I was a teenager and has stuck with me my whole life. And he said, "You've heard it said that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink." And my dad never used swear words except like twice. And this was one of the times in which he used a swear word. And he said, so it really got my attention. He said, "You've heard it said you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink." My dad said, "That's a damnable lie. Just put salt in its oats." So for the last 40 plus years, I've been striving to be a kind of person who figures out in every relationship that seems guided by the spiritual world as a destiny or a karmic moment, to figure out how to put salt in their oats, so that what out of my inner life that I wish to bless them with, as an awareness that there's something more for them, figure out how to offer it, my inward esotericism, in the greatest possible openness and deeds, so that it leads to a question. Well, anyway, Valdemar, you basically said it. I just said it in my words. Thank you for bringing that. And it looks like we have David Kavesh next.
Hello, I don't want to, I just had, you asked for people who may have had some kind of epiphany on basis of what you've done. It's not something that I feel that I want to take the time from your presentation to talk about, but it's, I just want to indicate that I'm in a study group that's been working with Awake for the Sake of the Future. And towards the very end, Steiner is talking about how to find the way out of the fall of the intellect. And the very last lecture was very hard for me to understand, on Hermann Grimm and Friedrich Nietzsche, and on the moral and anti-moral impulses as seeds for future order of nature. But I think it's closely bound up with what you've presented so far. So I just wanted to let people know about that. And it was a lecture on January the 28th, 1923. So.
Thank you, David. The last time I kind of stumbled across that was over a decade ago, and I didn't make any headway in that either and never finished it. But now I might be ready to go back. So thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate you pointing it out. Leon, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna hold for just a moment and grab a couple of others since you had an opportunity earlier to speak. Charlene?
Leland?
Yes.
You know, I have some background noise, so let me know if it's interfering. When you were talking about Ahriman and Lucifer, I just wanted to know if you could say something briefly about the Asuras, because it's my understanding that they really want Ahriman and Lucifer to stay separated. And what you said about Christ, I think, is one way for us to I don't know if it's like redeem or work with or counteract the Asuras, what exactly like we want to do. But I think we want to somehow counteract the polarization that they seem to want. Any comments?
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
I'm just gonna, great, Charlene, good question. And that was framed really nicely. And so for me, the starting place, and this is what I'm going to offer within this context, is that and it's Rudolf Steiner's starting place. And I believe I mentioned this also in the presentation I just mentioned earlier at Chicago branch, how Ahriman thwarts perception of Christ. And Rudolf Steiner, right there, I believe I used that quote and it's up on screen. Rudolf Steiner says that the way to do it is if you start finding yourself going too far with Ahriman, being dragged from the gift to temptation to evil and onward to death, he said, ask for Lucifer's help. Lucifer is always going to be ready to drag you back from the slippery slope of Ahriman. Rudolf Steiner then goes on to say, in basically the next sentence, the same thing. If you find yourself getting carried away, lured away by Lucifer, then appeal to Ahriman, and Ahriman will be right there to help you, to bring you back to center. And so, and of course, Christ in the center. So this is how, that's another way, exactly what you were referring to. This is how we stay centered in that center place between both being grounded and connected, and go out from there. And I think you're right, at the stage that most of us are at, if we do that, if we increasingly and consciously learn how to partner with Lucifer and Ahriman and Christ in the middle, not only will we be engaged in what Rudolf Steiner calls the redemption of Lucifer and Ahriman, but yes, he says there is a protective element. Now, there are other protective elements with regard to the Asuras, including the 6 essential exercises, the main exercises, and the Lord's Prayer. So those 4 things, it seems to me that Rudolf Steiner sort of keeps coming back to or referring to or pointing to. 6 essential exercises, the main exercise, which are really more than one exercise. The main exercise is the Lord's Prayer and learning how to partner with Christ, Lucifer, and Ahriman. That's what I would offer. If you do that, you're going to be good. And if at the point that you need more, it'll be shown to you. Sarah.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lelan. I just wanted to add to what you were saying a little earlier about there not being any evidence of working in community. And my experience is there may not be manifest evidence, but what has how can I put it? It's like what has pilgrimaged me to the place that I am now is faith, that it is the deepest esoteric knowledge that the work that I do on myself, which in sort of psychological terms, I've had to do in order to survive. I've had to honor basically my most profound love for nature. That's where I discovered love, was in the beauty of the land and creatures and plants. And so the bit I'm trying to say is, in knowing that I have to give and I have to align and I have to be with what I value the most, and I have to do that out of a place of not knowing anything else. From that place, I know that I change the world alongside all of those others, and with this most profound gift from the cosmic realm and deep from within the center of the earth, as it listens to where we rein ourselves into her. That's it.
Beautiful, Sarah. Thank you for that. Yes, I so agree. with what you shared and the words that you very consciously chose to describe that. It was deeply meaningful. It did prompt me also to recall that other thing that I believe in response to Valdemar, what he said earlier. But first, with you, so yes, absolutely. Rudolf Steiner uses the phrase spiritual isolation. So there is a process that we all must go through on our journey that includes this individuation, this coming to know ourselves, this spiritual isolation. And we use that term, and there's other terms like it. Right. That and those are descriptive of what it feels like. But as you pointed out, it also, as real as it is, it's also not true at another level, because we are also in community by everything that we do. And Steiner talks about multiple ways in which we may not see it, but at the etheric, astral, and other levels, that we are in relationship to humanity. And every step forward, that one of the ways he talks about it is that every step forward that we make, what feels very individual, is actually breaking trail or setting up signposts, so that the next person who isn't quite able to do what we just achieved is able to be a little bit easier for them. That's just one type of community. Another type of community that comes out of this is spiritual isolation. This is more my words of trying to describe it, is that this process of coming to know ourselves includes discovering the ways in which we are so completely unique, that there is our individual spirit, that there is none other like us. And so this process is a process of not just coming to know ourselves, but coming to be ourselves. And in that process, there is a feeling we can feel in this, on the aspect of the path characterized by spiritual isolation, the experience of feeling spiritually isolated. We get to an imaginative way of saying it is, we get to the point, we're making progress, and we get to this point where it's as if we could say the only being in the universe who knows us, that we feel understands us, is Christ. And it could be others, Sophia and things like that. The classic is to talk about, to use Christ, until the only person who seems that we can bring all of ourselves to and feel all of ourselves reflected back in love and appreciation is from the Christ being. And when we reach that point, so to speak, again, imaginatively, because Christ is with us and in us in all these ways, but it's as if we then come and we reach Christ in a certain way, in a relationship and encounter with Christ. And in that embrace and that welcome, Christ then sort of turns us around and has us look back on the path that we came from. And he reaches over our shoulder and says, look, there's everybody.
Exactly. It's the initiatory journey.
Yeah.
Savona.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. The other thought that you brought up that reminded me of the thought earlier with Valdemar is, yes, on the journey and about our dark sides and having to own that and work with that. However, what Sarah, I believe you were also referring to in your beautiful words, is that in that journey, which includes the darkness and the light and all of that, that the most common message we will receive back from the spiritual world, whether it's our guardian angel, whether it's nature spirits, or all the way up, as we develop the capacity to perceive and receive from them, is affirmation. It's one of the characteristics by how can you tell the difference between the sort of the good beings and the bad beings, the progressives and the degenerates. And that is that They won't mince words, so to speak. They won't mince communications about things that we need to pay attention to that are stumbling blocks or hindrances or sin or evil or whatever. They'll certainly tell us, but they do it within the context of affirmation and saying, it can be like, again, imaginatively, it's, you have done, well done, daughter. And we're so glad you're here. Well done. And now here's what's next. And let's work on this together. And here's the way out. Here's the way forward. And they provide us with the gifts that enable us to not get trapped in our darkness or our uncertainties or our fears, but rather always make a way for us to escape, always make a way for us to take the next step forward. And so to the degree that there's anyone here listening to these words who has felt that due to your sense of your own inner darkness or failings or fear or lack of health on whatever and however many aspects of your being, however many failures, the messages I hear from people who just keep getting this message over and over, you're a failure, you're a failure, you're a failure. That is not the good spirits that are saying that. And so there is a way of needing to choose which voices you're going to listen to. And God every day sets before us, or through our guardian and through others, sets before us every day the choice between life and death, between light and darkness. And the spiritual world that is for us always comes every day, every moment, saying, look, we give you the choice. Life, death, light, darkness, your choice, but please choose life. Choose light. And then it's back to us what we do.
Choose love.
Choose love. Choose beauty. Choose goodness. Choose faith. Choose relationship. Choose community. Choose wisdom, Sophia, the being.
And I love this. I'm listening to you say choose, and I'm thinking we need to chew it as well. It's choose. We're chewies. So we choose, because we need to digest it. We need to bring it down. It needs, it's, so this comes down. It's amazing. I love the words. Anyway, I'm going to mute myself. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you. That's it. But we are still talking about the words that Rudolf Steiner brought, that were just shared with us. We are still talking about Ross's example to us, and that we're still on the topic. We have not tangented away. All right, Leon, you've been very patient. Let's see, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, I have not been very patient because I've been totally engaged and enjoying the conversation. So thanks for the intro there. I was intending originally to share a bit about my personal experience with the three aspects that are needed. And I've decided, let's leave that for another time because I've heard so much value so far. Instead, I want to take the opportunity to ask, have we been talking with Florin Lowndes? Because his last name isn't on the identification.
I don't think Florian, was it Florian?
Florian.
Yeah, I don't think it was Lowndes.
It's different from Florin Lowndes, huh?
I believe so. Yeah, in Honolulu, I think Sadao might be his last name. I might be saying that wrong.
Yeah, Florence Sadao.
Sadao.
Yeah, he started the Anthroposophy group on Facebook, very old.
I just wanted to then share something that may facilitate further conversation. As a teenager, okay, I saw this program on TV where Carl Jung was interviewed. You may have seen versions of it online. At one point, the interviewer asks him bluntly, "Do you believe in God?" And he pauses for a moment and he says, "I don't need to believe, I know."
There you go.
That hit me like, as a kid, like a ton of bricks. And I said, I want that. I'm not interested in believing all this stuff. Then much later, I got into Oxford. And coming from a working class city, totally working class environment, I appreciated and experienced for the first time class consciousness, the upper classes looking down on me, not even speaking to me like good morning at breakfast or hello on the street. And I got a real inward sense of this business of appreciating the other human being. And the third was I went into biology, into life science. And one day in a famous bookstore in Oxford, I pulled this book off the shelf, and the used shelf, of course. The title was Problems of Life. I thought, I got problems. I better look at this. But it wasn't about that. It was about the philosophy of life. What is the nature of life? And this was a Viennese biologist who moved to the States subsequently. Each of his chapters was prefaced by a quote from Goethe. That was my first introduction to Goethe. And he showed how throughout history there have been two major explanations of life. One, vitalism, the other, mechanism. The mechanism came in and said that everything is physical. Everything can be reduced to chemistry, etc., etc. The vitalist said, no, there's something else, something vital and mysterious. This biologist showed that both of those were at the time based on the notion that it was mechanical, because the vitalists even were saying that it needed this thing or this entity inside it, this entelechy or whatever it was called, to make it work. And he showed it works out of itself. He showed that there's a kind of thermodynamics that isn't Newtonian. Everything doesn't run down. And he showed that things can self-generate. And this choosing life became very real for me. And I've followed it through in all my biological research since. I've done work in the environment that involved bringing people together to solve the environmental problems. And I found that that was the only really long-lasting way to proceed. Anyway, I'll shut up now and we can talk some more.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of your journey and that great quote from Jung. George.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm George Aitken from Inverness in Scotland. I wanted just to add something to what you said about Romans in chapter 8, because I was quite impressed with that as well. That some of the translations into English from, I guess, the original Greek actually single out the creature. And certainly in the King James Version, you can read that the creature is waiting with expectation of redemption. And as you said, this redemption, so the apostle says, will come through the children of God or the sons of God. And the sons of God are actually named as those human beings, at least named in the prologue to the Gospel of John, as those human beings who will take the Christ principle into themselves, which of course then opens us up to this concept of love, or what the Greeks referred to as love in its spiritual sense as agape. The agape will become the force that redeems creation. that agape will become a science, really, in a sense, because love will become a form of cognition. Leonardo da Vinci had said that when you have the wisdom of something, you will love it. And Goethe, of course, from the other pole said, when you love something, you will know it. You will have its wisdom. When you actually love something, you actually know it. And it's a bit like, I suppose someone once said that the Christian principle of trying to save yourself, you'll lose yourself. And it's just yourself you're trying to save. And that applies to all humanity. If humanity just tries to save itself without trying to save the kingdoms of nature, it will lose itself. And of course, how does this all happen? Well, that's the task at hand that we have to do. And of course, it's something that will happen over multiple incarnations. It's not going to happen probably in our lifetimes, obviously, although maybe with some individuals will take steps towards that. But it brings to mind, you know, what the poet Keats once said in a letter, that the eagle's nest is made the finer for the mountaineer looking into it. So I wanted just to add that. Another thing you mentioned were demons. This is getting on a slightly different level now, but Rudolf Steiner, of course, does say that our souls are full of demons. And in fact, he does say in a lecture, he uses an analogy with that. He says that our souls are like Swiss cheese infested with maggots. So that's quite a thought to think about. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to contribute.
Well, thank you, George. A couple thoughts that just come to mind just to add is that in those scriptures, Bible scriptures, you're referring to another element that gets pretty immediately connected there with love, with agape, is the resurrection power of Christ. The same power that raised Christ from the dead is one way in which it's stated. The same power that raised Christ from the dead is now available to us. And it's part of the mystery that Paul also refers to in Ephesians or Galatians. And so when you put those together with what you were talking about, the enlivening of love, so naming something kills it, loving something, we end up animating it, so to speak, if I can use that word, and that animation is the same power that raised Christ from the dead, which sends us off into some amazing things when it says that this is part of the mystery revealed, again, to use Paul's words, that's available to all of us now, every single one of us. And then also on that, the image of the demons in our souls, one of the ways Steiner does, he does this drawing on the board. He basically draws a circle and he puts all these like little X's in the circle. So the circle is the soul. All these little X's are all the demons. And then right in the middle, he puts this dot, which is Christ. And then he says, Steiner says, and of course, again, he's not the only one, but this is the way, one of the ways through Steiner, presents this is then, so Christ is there in our souls, in the center of our soul. Now it's up to us. Free will, what do we want to do? Christ is just waiting. He's sort of knocking on our heart, knocking on our soul, knocking on the door and saying, come on in and join him. And then as we partner with Christ, and then Steiner's illustration was, as we partner with Christ to pay attention to the dark sides of our lives, to the demons, to these kinds of things, Christ will do this redemptive and healing and cleansing and purifying and transforming work. And then his illustration was, Christ expands. So you've got a circle, all these demons, Christ expands and pushes the demons out, as it were, until in relationship, in partnership with him, this is done with a certain degree of consciousness, a certain amount of grace, and done. And what is, possible for us is getting to this cleansed and purified soul. It's a beautiful picture, and the way he describes it is lovely. The last thing that I will mention is yes to what you said about multiple lifetimes, but one of the sense of urgency, perhaps, is the word that I would use, that Steiner gives us. If I'm understanding him correctly, he's saying we are in the generation of incarnations. We're, end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. We're in one of the first generations of a time period of incarnations, of people coming through. So their next incarnation. So we're already here, and there's others that are gonna continue coming in for the next several hundred years at least, until everybody cycles through. And what Steiner says is that, as I understand it, is that on prior incarnations, depending on how we ended that incarnation in terms of the nature and quality of our relationship with Christ, each time we end an incarnation that doesn't have a good relationship, to just speak very loosely, a tight, conscious, committed, some kind of relationship to Christ, the next incarnation, it becomes all the more difficult, but still possible, still all these millennia, still all this grace that really assists us to come into a right relationship with Christ. Still doesn't force us, but that we're at this crux, this set of incarnations, a single incarnation for each of us as everybody's coming in, where how we end this incarnation in terms of our relationship with Christ will have a much more demonstrable consequence at our next incarnation. And he talks about, I won't sidetrack too much to say more about it, you can go find this yourself, but he says it's actually literally going to start changing our physical appearance, our physiognomy. And we're in the images of the sheep, and dividing the sheep from the goats and the wheat from the chaff, and that we are moving in our next incarnations where that is going to start becoming visible. And every human being will begin to know sort of where we are in relationship to Christ, and that this is going to become an increasingly manifest reality for each of us. So absolutely, this is still over multiple incarnations. We've got a long ways to go, but it's kind of like it's getting serious, folks. We're at sort of another turning point or transition point in humanity's development. Yeah.
Just from my own personal experience, I want to share with you, and I don't think I'm the only one experiencing this. More or less, we are all aware that there is this point in the center, this Christ within ourselves. But then it becomes absolutely essential that we choose to allow the Christ to expand within ourselves. And in my personal experience, for a long time, I was afraid of allowing that to happen. It has taken me a number of years before I was able to understand that the Christ would be there whether I like it or not, but that my choice to acknowledge his presence is what is going to make possible any change for the future. In fact, is going to allow the future to become reality now. And one of the means that I got to this point is the foundation stone meditation. Ross referred to it earlier on when he was in the recording, but really it is something that we can do to nourish the presence of the Christ and strengthen our will to become co-creators.
Absolutely. And one of the things Ross brought yesterday with regard to that is not just the Christ, but the Trinity.
Yes.
So Father, Principle, Son, God, Spirit, God. So yeah, very good. Thank you, Yaya. Well, I way over prepared for this because look, you all been talking for about an hour, and which is outstanding. It's just awesome. We are getting down to about the last 15 minutes of our formal time. I don't have a need necessarily to go through what else I had prepared. You all, as I said at the beginning, we are here and can all be teaching each other and finding our connections and putting it into our different words of how we're experiencing it. How about what I would like, I don't want to shut down anybody offering their epiphanies or revelations or things that they know or see how the connections that they're making. But I wonder if we might shift gears to questions. Maybe we've heard from people who have been overflowing with answers. I wonder if we could now create space for people to ask questions, and no guarantee. Sometimes these questions, no guarantee that I or anybody else is going to answer them right now, because sometimes we'll just say, perfect question, keep going, you're on the right track, keep going. But some of the other questions, perhaps we might offer something in return. But let's shift to questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Lelan. Thank you. I hope this gets recorded because I missed the first hour, but you were mentioning how the Christ presence can push out the demons. Well, given that what we're observing super sensibly is with this whole CV situation, there's a lot of more demons coming in from various, it's becoming very demonized. So how do you actually practically perceive that happening, and any recommendations you have? Because what I'm observing, you can actually pick up other people's demons by just being around them. And I think it's probably having those holes in one's aura or makes you vulnerable to that. And then we have to kind of clear it. But yeah, and there's a call of making us stronger, obviously, and that's why the scenario is apocalyptic scenario is happening. But is there like your personal observations, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, great, beautiful question. So a couple of things to begin with. One is I really like, again, Rudolf Steiner, the way he talks about this. There's so many things that Rudolf Steiner brings that he's not the only one who brings this, but he just does such a good job. So he's kind of my man right now. So that's why I kind of keep referring back to him. Plus, this is an anthroposophical group, so we're okay with going to him. One of the things that I like, one of the ways in which he says this, and that is, it's not so much from a certain perspective, it's not, from one perspective, there's always another perspective. From one perspective, it's not that there's more demons, it's that as we move, as more and more people move, towards consciousness soul development, and actually being engaged on consciousness soul development, whether we are conscious of it, because there's, as we're moving towards consciousness and consciousness soul development, there's the natural initiation aspect where it's happening to people, so to speak, and then there's the conscious initiation path that most of us here are on, that is where we are consciously developing this consciousness and supersensible perception and things like that. So what he says is, one of the ways is it's not so much that it's changed, it's that we're becoming aware of them. And that, so one is we're becoming aware of them in a couple different ways, at least that we're becoming aware of them, is that the in order to help us become aware of them, some of the, if we could use this language, some of the grace that we've been receiving that's sort of been the protective grace in order for us to be able to keep making progress forward and not be as hindered, or be hindered only as much as would help us be able to move forward. Some of that grace, protective grace, so to speak, is being withdrawn. He uses this language, so that in order for us to wake up and begin to be making more choices for ourselves, not just the prenatal intentions choices, but conscious choices while incarnated. And so it's part of waking us up. It's part of the initiatory path. And then for us to begin to discover the truth and more truth about these kinds of things. So I don't mean to quibble, but the reason I say that is that, and so yes, there's a perspective in which with Ahriman, what's happening in this era, that there is sort of a focused intensity. So the intensity is ratcheting up, which makes it seem like more, but also then we have this, this sort of protective grace is sort of stepping back. So to wake up to it. Now, this is particularly true in the annual cycle of the year during the Holy Nights, in which leading up to the hidden Holy Night of New Year's Eve. And it starts with Advent and then really kicks into gear during the first Holy Nights up to New Year's Eve, where there is this kind of withdrawal for all of humanity during these nights. There's this sort of stepping back of the spiritual world so that we have the potential to become aware of some truths about ourselves that we throughout the rest of the year, we may more easily ignore. And that is that by the stepping back of some of these sorts of graces and sort of protections, we get to see a little more clearly who we actually are when we don't have all of this grace and protection. And so many people talk about the holidays, Christmas and things like that, and we're forced into relationships and parties and gatherings that we would not normally, that we avoid the rest of the year as much as possible. And now we have that, and all these things, all our stuff comes up. We revert, we get together with family and we revert to childhood kinds of rivalries and things like that, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, where does that come from? It was there the whole time. Spiritual world steps back, so it comes up. Our demons show up, our addictions come up. We become more reactive on the astral level. Our antipathies surface and are glaring for us. All of these things are part of the same kind of dynamic that you're bringing up. But we see it in this in an annual way. We can track it and see it and learn to work with it. And what the spiritual world is seeking to do, whether it's with increasing awareness of demons or increasing awareness of the truths about ourselves, is to assist us to wake up and then to choose. Who are we going to just try to cover it up? Are we just going to try to manage it? Are we going to just try to, beg God or exorcists to come in and, kick the demons out or whatnot? Or are we going to, and some of those kinds of things we need. So there is a way to get to your question. The first step that I always recommend is that you, if you can, turn to Christ. If you can't turn to Christ, turn to Sophia. If you can't turn to Sophia, turn to your guardian. If you can't turn to your guardian, turn to your higher self. Find someone you trust. Find a being that you trust. And if you can't trust any of those spiritual beings, then find a human being. Now, a human being is going to be really helpful along the way anyway, but because whatever level of our capacity to align and communicate with, enter into relationship with, enter into partnership with spiritual beings, our higher self, our guardian, Sophia, Christ, the Holy Spirit, the Father, whoever it is for you, we're always whatever level we're at. And so we do our part first out of free will to choose to Michael, Uriel, Raphael, whoever, we reach out to these beings and ask them for assistance for them to reveal to us. And then there's other exercises. We ask questions as we go into sleep and have the questions begin to return over the next days. And so we do those kinds of things. But then, yes, if our soul is really Swiss cheesed, if we're having difficulty discerning between good spirits and bad spirits, if we just are lost with some aspect of ourselves, which, hey, I've got mine that I'm working on right now, then yes, turning to a human being that you trust can be very helpful and frankly essential. Now we're back to the community, and it's not just the community across the threshold, but it's the community here on earth. And so, is there someone that that you trust, who you think has the potential to have enough spiritual perception to help you, to have a gift of healing, to be able to assist you, the capacity to perceive and offer guidance or mentoring that you need in order for you for your soul to be cleared and to be healed. I want you to know that this work can go very rapidly, miraculously rapidly, at least in some aspects. And so, but other aspects take more time, more concentration over time. But I am coming across lately many people who are reaching out to me who have been dealing with things for decades and making no progress, feeling like there's no progress with their demons. And that ought not be the case. And so please don't give up. Please look to the spiritual world and look to the human world for people who may be able to assist you. And I can't, in no way can I promise anything to an individual, but I will tell you with absolute conviction and truth out of experience in my own life being helped and in helping others, that if you feel stuck, you don't need to be stuck. There is a way out, and it can come rapidly. So keep going, persevere, and find the healing and help that you need. Is that helpful at all, or do you have another follow-up question or something I can clarify?
Well, that's kind of what we have been doing, clearing, and we've seen certain increase due to Wi-Fi and also due to the beings connected with this corona crisis. There is acceleration of beings. So the question is specific mentioning the Christ, the more I think you build this Christ eye, that may provide that protection. That's kind of been my conclusion to this, and just meditating and asking Christ specifically every day for prolonged, to clear the darkness within. And because that's what kind of allows us beings to, its resonance to come in. So that's something I've been working with, with Michaelic angels, and also with Christ being in Vidar and Michael. That's been my way of dealing with this. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for saying that. So the next thing is potentially for you and for all of us. I don't know exactly where you're at right at the moment, but for all of us, there's the next step. So just in the words that you said, it's about turning to Christ and asking for help, and for Christ and Michael and Vedar and all to do these things. Yes, that's the first step. However, there's the next step. And that is where the spiritual world is seeking for us to learn how to do this ourselves and in ourselves. And then in that way, so partly learning from the spiritual world, so the spiritual world does certain things for us. Then we learn how to do things for ourselves. Then we turn around and help others. And so it's possible. I'm coming across lots of people. I went through this myself. I still go through it, still have cycles of it where I appear not to be getting the healing, purification, cleansing, protection, whatever that I expect. And it's like it falls off. It's not working anymore, or not working like it used to. And that is very often, very frequently, perhaps most frequently, it's the way of the spirit. When the spiritual world gets silent or things stop working, it's because the spiritual world wants to transition you to the next thing, wants you to learn the next thing. Within this stuff, it's very often it's learning how to do it ourselves. So if you're being affected by Zoom, by internet, by the coronavirus or things like that, again, I would just like to offer that ought to be, because you have the capacity to, all of us have the capacity to be able to do this protective work ourselves. We learn it from spiritual world, we learn it from other human beings in order to begin to do it. And it becomes less about asking it to be done for us and learning how to do it with and for ourselves. So I have, that's how I've heard, I spend so much time on the computer, and I had to, and my computer would always be crashing everywhere I go. There's a different background wherever I go, because I go from house to house to house, and I don't have my own home, my wife and I. And we do house sitting and pet sitting and childcare. We take people's kids and pets and homes, and we take care of them. So I'm always going around. Internet bandwidth is like nil. At this house, the upload speed for this video that I'm doing with you right now is 0.3 megabytes per second. In other words, you should not be seeing me. The only reason you see me is because I partner 2.5 years ago, when all this started happening, what you're talking about, experiencing like there's more happening, it's just becoming aware of it. And so 2.5 years ago is like, you're going to keep having problems until you get over your issue with calling Ahriman the enemy and nothing but the enemy. And the only way you're going to be able to fulfill your destiny is to be able to learn to partner with Ahriman, so that Ahriman is helping you with your technology. And so I have all sorts of stories that I can tell of so much destruction of technology and technology not working, and literally burning, taking it in, it's not working, it's literally burned from the inside out, fried, literally. And it's like, where's that coming from? And those were all just challenges as a gift from Ahriman for me to finally wake up to learn how to partner with Ahriman. Now Ahriman and I are buds. And so it's miracles that I'm able to do things like be here with you today. I offer that as just the testimony that could be your next step as well, is to the spiritual world wants you to learn how to start doing some of this kind of protective and healing and purification yourself at a next level than you're at. Is that possible? Does that resonate at all?
Well, I missed the first hour. Unfortunately, I'm hoping to listen to it when it's recorded. So I have not been partnering with Ahriman. Lucifer, I'm seeing certain benefits from, but yeah, that's, but now they actually have Aseratic beings also. So that's a whole, and Azuric beings. So observing them super sensibly, so it seems like, and I don't know if human beings are actually ready to partner with those beings yet. And those are beings behind some of the things we see happening also. So yeah, I probably need a little more contemplation of this and listening to the first hour, but thank you.
Yeah. And I am aware that we're at the end of our 2 hours. I'll just comment on this last thing, and that is, it is my opinion and my experience and my reading of Rudolf Steiner that these more apparently terrifying beings, some of whom have been named and others not yet in this gathering, it is my understanding, my experience, and I'll say my opinion, that they're not really our concern right now. That if we become concerned about them, they're certainly not our priority, and we don't have to be concerned about them. If you're having, being able to perceive them, I'm happy for you, as long as you're not getting sidetracked by them. They're just a distraction. Are they involved? Yes, but they're mostly a distraction to draw us away from doing the work that we actually need to be doing, which is at my best way of saying this, our work is with each other, human beings, and with Christ, Sophia, Lucifer, and Ahriman. If you get your relationships with your relationship with yourself, I should say, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with other human beings, not just the ones that you feel are for you, but also the enemies, there, so to speak. There was kind of a reference to that. The word enemy wasn't used, but it was referred to earlier in this presentation by somebody, that we need to, and so with other human beings, and then with Christ, Sophia, Lucifer, and Ahriman. If you are paying attention to those and getting all of those taken care of, getting the demons out of your soul, on these kinds of processes, if you pay attention to those things, you will be protected. By and large, I'm ready to say 99.9% of us, for effect, I'm going to say 99.9% of us, 99.9% of the time, will have no, direct damage or attack from any of these more often seemingly terrifying beings if we do our work here, because that's what our work is. They're mostly there as a distraction at this point to keep us from doing our work, so then we are indeed vulnerable. But frankly, also Steiner, as near as I can tell, and I know that there are people who I've heard disagree with me on this or teaching something else, but I believe the correct reading of Steiner is that just as we are in, we have a response, Christ has done his element, Christ has done Christ's redemption of Lucifer and Ahriman. Now it's up to humans to finish that work. The same process is in play with these other beings as well. And so focus on what our responsibility is, which is here, and let Christ take care of these other beings until we as individuals and a community, and if the time comes for us to be engaging these other beings more directly. I think that's the safest approach. If you're part of the 0.1% that does have a responsibility now to be engaging with those higher beings, then that presupposes that all your other work is done to a sufficient level that you can do so in an appropriate way. Think of it this way. If you are still at the point of asking Christ and Michael to protect you, then you are not ready to be going and trying to have a direct confrontation or relationship or conversation with higher beings beyond Lucifer and Ahriman, okay? So protect yourself, be wise. Okay, thank you for those who've stuck around past our time. I want to be faithful to our end time, or as close as possible. So I'm ready to hand it back to Frank.
Okay, thank you so much, Lelan. Great to have everyone, and thank you for hosting such a dialogue and opening up the questions. Lots of questions. Also, thank you, Jonathan, for the tech support, and the programs committee for coordinating this sequence of speakers. So wonderful. Thank you all for integrating Ross and bringing that continuity of the community and inviting us into community as it is in our hands together, this future work of the anthroposophical movement. So as for the offerings of the branch of Rudolf Steiner in Chicago, tomorrow we don't have an offering. So it will be then on Wednesday again. And let me just look at the offering so I can name it. I will have Tatiana Pavlova with Cosmic Cult, and that will be an hour earlier than today. So today, if you're in Chicago, is at 2 p.m. Tomorrow we'll start at 1 p.m. or Wednesday will be at 1 p.m. Anything that you'd want to say just to close us out? Otherwise, I pass it back to you, Leland, and wish you all blessings in the holy nights.
Thank you. I did just take a quick glance at some of the chat messages. I really didn't have a chance to read all of them. But I saw at least one person who indicated wanting to be able to reach me. You may reach me by email at lelan@wisecosmos.com. And hopefully on your screen, you see at the bottom left, I think, how my name is spelled. Lelan. There's no D. D is normal. Lelan is normal. There's no D. Lelan without the D at wisecosmos.org. And happy to receive your communications. Thank you for this opportunity to bring this content, and thank you for bringing at least half of it. I am really grateful. These are the types of future gatherings that Rudolf Steiner was referring to 98 years and a day ago. And this is what he said needs to be happening. And so I'm very inspired by all of you. Thank you. And I wish you just the greatest blessings on the rest of your holy nights. Thank you.
Thank you, Leland. It was great.